Okay, hi everybody. This is Community's production readiness sub-project meeting for April 30th. Um, as I'll display the agenda. We have a few items here. Um, so, David, you had this item on the agenda for a long time. Did you want to talk about it today?
Yeah, well, it's actually most useful when the shadows are here. Uh, I I am interested in whether they just aren't interested in advancement. Like there's like, I'm willing to help, but I don't want to be on the hook, which I would understand and potentially sympathize with, but I would choose to prioritize, for reviews those that did. That's kind of my
Okay,
thing.
well, go ahead, Macha, and then maybe we keep it on for next time as well.
So the main problem, as I was talking with some of the shadows in London, was that they don't have the time for actually shadowing, which was partially related to a different topic. I don't know if it's actually my after the stable betas one about changing how we would react with the PRR freeze, which would basically allow the shadows for some time to do the reviews. Because currently, as we're seeing, and sadly we're at fault as well, a lot of the caps are pushed all the way very close to the deadline, which basically means none of the shadows or very few of the shadows have actually the time to review and take part in the process. If we would decide to go with a week prior freeze where all the caps that you are planning to submit for a particular release, they should be in a SIG approved state. And this would be this way you would basically apply to a PRR, because I know that a lot of us have reviewed the PRR section prior to the SIG reviewing an enhancement, and that frequently doesn't give the shadow the time to do the reviews. If we would invert the situation and force the SIG to do it a week prior, leave that last week for shadows and ourselves to do a proper reviews. Of course, we could always introduce a similar exception process like for any other enhancements that exist. And from what I was talking with the SIG release, they would be happy to help us with enforcing that. That could actually work in our benefit, that we wouldn't be so much overwhelmed with the reviews in the last few days of the enhancement freeze, but also allow shadows to do their work and maybe grow more. So that's roughly.
So I
David?
figured I would chime in and talk a little bit about part of the reason why it is structured the way that it is structured, at least as I remember it. In the beginning, there was me, John, and Wojtek, and the one of the things that we considered is one of the things we were concerned about is making something that was easy for us, but was heavyweight for everyone trying to contribute code. And so what part of what you're looking at, Mache, is the result of a process that is optimized to be as light touch for the SIG as possible at the expense of the people actually doing the review. So like I think at least for my part that I recognize that there is pain there. I've experienced the pain many releases now. Um, but that's why we chose to put the pain there, so that it was most good for the most people. And before we make a change there, we should try to remember why it was the way it was, and what the consequences of shifting some of that burden are. And I guess I would love to hear from Wojtek and John. Like, do you guys remember it the same way? Um,
Yeah, I think it was like it's the same thing, the same way I remember it. I would just add one more thing that like obviously people are pushing things towards the deadline. So but I'm a little bit afraid that if we enforce the like the strict deadline for like SIG approval a week earlier, we will actually cut some useful caps, because there are different caps that like just require a bunch of discussions, and like they aren't really being worked for multiple weeks until the deadline. And I would like to avoid like slowing down like those kind of large efforts too.
Yeah, sorry, Ben. Well, go ahead, Ben. Actually, I'll wait till after you're done, and then I'll say something.
Sure, but like they have the same amount of time. We're just offsetting the point in the cycle by a week. The problem that I see right now is that because you can actually just have your KEP ready for PRR approval a couple days before PRR approval, there's no capability to do the shadow to approver cycle for that. You because it just has to go straight to approvers so that we can actually get it approved in time. We can't bounce it back and forth. It also means that we are teaching people to depend on the set of approvers we have doing this massive crunch. If we tell people you actually need to have this in a state where all you need is PRR approval with some time bound on that, then we have a window where we just burn down the PRR approvals and fix any gaps there. Right now, you can still be trying to get the SIG to agree on things right up until the PRR deadline, which doesn't seem healthy for anyone. And like as someone that's attempted to shadow many times, like most of the keps that are initially in the dashboard are irrelevant. They're not actually ready for review, or they're just being tracked again and there's no new changes. And then there's a huge wave of keps that land in like the last few days, and there's no opportunity to participate in shadowing those because there's this huge urgency to get them approved by the deadline.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Macho was hoping to fix here. But I actually would broaden this to, like, if we're gonna do that, we have crunches for both PRR but also for API review, and API reviews an even harder review to do, right? And I think there's maybe even fewer people who are really doing them. I think we have, yeah, like so. I, I would argue that we should talk to the API review team and see if we can just shift. If we're going to do this, it shouldn't be for PRR. It should be SIG approval deadline is 1 week early. And then what's remaining? You need these. There are two, as far as I know, there are only two cross project approvals that we need as API and PRR. And so that means that, yeah, it kind of shifts it a week earlier, but I agree people still, most of that, so right now so much of the work is done right at the tail end, and there's no incentive to push people to do it any earlier because they don't have to. Like, maybe that'll become the big deadline, right? And people won't and maybe so as far as which week it falls on, I guess we can kind of argue that either way, like whether it actually goes after the freeze, what was traditionally the freeze week, or before. Like what, but it's really a SIG release thing, and I think we should bring the API reviewers in and kind of make it a joint discussion.
I can tell you about API review as well. I'm not attempting to become an approver there even remotely anytime soon, but I've been kind of just soaking up what happens there because it's just useful to know. So I'm just listening, that sort of thing. And from having done that for a while, they maintain a continuous backlog of things that need review, and it is not really cycle locked. And you are at a huge risk of not making it in a release if you wait until any sort of like approval deadline. that
is
don't
very
really
true.
encourage that at all.
The biggest one is the actual review of the PR, and if it is late, we just don't feel bad. I think
Yeah, the PR, you're talking about the actual implementation PR as opposed to the design, the cap.
yeah. There were a couple this past release, at least one that I was like, I just don't know the background. It's like, can you learn the background? I can't learn the background responsibly in a week. I'm sorry. If someone else thinks they can, they can. I think one got punted and Tim was confident in the other.
There's also a different approach to shadowing, which could be worth considering, but I think it works a little better in part because there's not quite as many of them. So it's just like a online, like Jordan will do a review and you can observe and participate in that, or sometimes he'll have someone else take a stab at doing the review, like live in the call. I think that's hard to scale and works a little better for these much more targeted ones. The scope on PRR touching every KEP is a little trickier, but mostly that the whole thing where it's just a continuous backlog and there is no expectation that they're going to rush approvals to a deadline is also something to consider.
So, Richard, your hand is up. Is that a stale hand, or you have wanted to say
I
something?
have, but like, please respond. I will.
Okay. So I guess my question is, how do you accomplish that not getting cycle out? Because I mostly work with Tim as an API reviewer, and he's he's pretty cycle out. He gets a pretty intense week or two before code freeze, but also kept freeze. Right, both are brutal on him. So and for API review, and so I'm curious, David, as one of the other API reviewers, like how have you managed to avoid that, or is it still a factor for you?
It is still extremely busy. I just acknowledge that, like, if I haven't seen your PR until the last week or two of a release, I don't expect it to merge, and I try to be upfront with people when that happens. I just send back a message like, "Yep, I'm gonna try to get to this." It is lower priority than the other ones that have been working through for the last month. If
Sure.
it makes it great, if it doesn't, I'm sorry. And I will prioritize you for the next one. Like I have one, it was a scheduling piece that missed, and I've been trying to get the author to update for the last 2 weeks, where it's like, hey, we know what you need to do next. Can you update so I can review? But it's a very different expectation because they know when they started getting me to look at that PR. And it is different than the KEP reviews.
I think it's a feedback loop. Like it's hard to break and it will be painful the first time when people have used to working a certain way, but like once they see that you can't depend on a crunch, then people will start to shift away from depending on it.
Wojciech?
So yeah, I wanted to make one more comment, like circling back to the topic that we were talking about before. As long as I would like to have more approvers, I fully agree with David. I'm not sure like we should be optimizing deadlines for shadow reviews. Like I think that like they're like majority of the caps are really ready for PRR review at the last week or so, but there is like some percentage that I don't know. For me, it's probably like 25% of like the caps that I'm reviewing that I can review like 2, 3, 4 weeks before. So like maybe we can utilize those for like shadows more, because I like in the end I would like to optimize for the project, like and like try to find other ways where we can train shadows and have them reach the approvers position.
I think the number is really small. I'm not really interested in trying, like from my point of view, I'm not trying to say let's make it really easy to become an approver. I'm in no rush. I've been shadowing for a long time. but I think that the crunch is really unhealthy for the project. It depends on approvers being people that can just set aside all of their time for like a week to push these through, which not everybody's going to be able to do and isn't really a reasonable expectation. It also means that people have this kind of broken expectation that they can design something and ship it the same release without having any prior discussion, which they won't be able to do once they hit something like API review that's more involved. I think that it will just be healthier for the project to move away from that crunch. And a side effect of that is that I think it's easier to explain it to people in terms of we're supposed to have shadows review first, but that isn't the most important part. If that makes sense.
I'm open to trying a change, but I would want, what do I want? I think we should be aware of the potential impact and then decide whether the impact is worth it. I mean, it's optimizing for the people who are actually doing the work, like also being, I mean, we're all pretty frequently the people who are doing the work. It's, I mean, all of us have run close to deadlines before, right? Hmm. I hate saying that I want to be stuck as like I'm going to be stuck here forever, and that result just is not useful for longevity. So I think I'd be open to it, but I wouldn't just. I want to be able to clearly say the goals, figure out whether we got closer to our goals doing that, and also enumerate what we think the consequences are likely to be.
Go ahead, Mache.
I mean, a lot will also depend on how we are going to execute it. Because if we will go with what John was proposing, that we would not shift the current deadline, but leave it as is, but more move the PRR approval by a week, which basically means theoretically you have 1 week more to ship a cap. That wouldn't be a major change. The only difference is that the PRR would have additional week. We would have reasonable time to review it and approve it. That wouldn't be in any way diminishing for everyone in comparison to what has happened in before. Rather, they all of the cap authors and PRRs would gain additional week to
Yeah,
close the most contentious part.
the problem with that is if that works if the things in the PRR are like, oh, you need to add metrics, so you need to do this, but it doesn't work if it's, oh, your design is completely not scalable, right? And then they're already accepted, and we're like, no, this is just not going to fly. So I kind of, it's probably not a great idea to do that. It it would be separate. It would be a separate enhanced, sort of a separate freeze, Ben. Like it would be you'd have the. It's probably not a good idea to do that. Because occasionally, it's not typical, but occasionally, like you have to push back on the overall design.
I think that also the timing of the week only matters the first time, the first release, because after that, it's cycle locked, right?
It's the
Like
expectation.
it'll happen. It still happen. It's gonna happen at the same frequency and duration, either way. Whether or not you do it before or after where the current week is slotted only really matters the first time, as far as this group.
Here's another thought. I mean, I like thinking about how API, the way you described with API review, how it doesn't get as badly cycle locked. Like, I mean, is there, and thinking about putting the onus on us, not on the other 1,000 people. Like, what if we could we just do a better job of early on going and saying, hey, I haven't seen this yet. You know, so the SIGs go through and we go back to the release process, right? The SIGs go through, they identify a bunch of things they want to work on. They opt in, like we have this opt-in mechanism now. And once they're opted in, if we assign somebody right at that time, and then we can be, you know, or the release team can be kind of nagging them as our current soft freeze approaches. And we do what you're suggesting here, I think, much is, which is like make it the soft freeze, like if your PRR is not done by then, like there's two parts that you said here. You said approved by SIG and entire PRR section filled in for review. It's traditionally been just that second part, but we haven't enforced it. Maybe the first step is to just try enforcing that and being like, hey, you didn't have this filled in. I'm not going to even necessarily look at it until until everybody who did fill it in is done or something like it. Can we just push back more and enforce that more? And so that means things that are like crazy in flight or changing a lot in that last week may not get, they may miss the boat because of changes there. Like, is this simply that we've been too easy on people? I guess is my question.
So my question, John, David, to you is, or Maciej, like, what was your experience the last release, or probably last two releases when we already have Maciej and Joe on board? Because like I didn't really have a product, even for things that were filled in the last week. I just had time to get to them. It wasn't always the case like on the year 2 years ago, but like when the last two releases were much easier for me. And like probably even if I would say like I will only get to the ones that will filled in last moment at the end, I would still get to them. So this wouldn't really
I agree. No, like in previous, like a couple years ago, like it was like, okay, I'm gonna be like, till 9 or 10 p.m. looking at these things, and now it's like, no, it's a normal day, right? I don't have like I might have to put time into it that I would have been doing other things, but I don't have to like work extra hours or something to get it done. Maybe one day, but not much at all. I'm not even sure that, right? So I do think it's a lot better with, even though we had more caps, I think it's been better. As far as the shadows thing goes, like if we're just more rigorous about nudging people earlier, like there's a couple caps I know of right now that we're working on and in the device management stuff that are like just about ready to merge, right? Like shadows could be looking at those now. We haven't even started the release cycle, right? So I think that maybe it's just a negligent management of the queue as opposed to an issue of process.
That's also true. So like we have the dashboard with all the opt-in issues. The problem is SIG leads will opt in something to say, yes, we're working on this release. And then there's like no actual updates, or somebody pushed a kept PR and they didn't bother to touch any of the PRR fields yet. So the only comment I leave is, can you fill in the PRR? Like, it's not very helpful. So it's trained me out of bothering to look for these in advance, because when I look, they're in really sorry state. They're not really seriously ready for review yet. And that all comes close to the deadline.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's my experience as well. Gotcha.
So to answer Wojtek's question, definitely the last review, I was basically done with everything. I believe Tuesday or Wednesday, and meaning Wednesday I was finishing at a normal time. I remember 1 or 2 releases before, I was working until 10 or whatever on Thursday, we're close to the deadline. But definitely the last one was super easy with that regards. But maybe we should still, because there has been multiple cases, and still I'm going back to our soft freeze. If we have to soft freeze, maybe be a little bit more descriptive with regards to, I remember seeing multiple PRs and head cap and updates that actually were created in that last week after the soft
Yes.
freeze. Maybe we will not require entire PRR filled. Maybe we will just require a cap being opened by that last week. I'm not even saying that it has to be reviewed by the SIG, has to have like filled in, but please make sure it's open by that date. Everything that is open after that date, we'll try, but we will not promise. And maybe if, for example, we'll miss one or two that will be open in 2 last days, because I know that people are opening cap and updates on the last day or 2 days prior to the freeze. Maybe going this way would be the soft freeze, as in you have to have a PR opened. And we can specifically ask the SIG release to make sure that if the cap update wasn't open by the soft freeze, sorry, you're out. You have to explicitly ask for an exception.
Right. So,
That would be, I would say that that will be a reasonable compromise with regards having APR, which means, and that was discussed a couple of times. People are discussing, they are aware that this is a thing. There is a deadline, and usually opening the document, it's a an hour, 2 hour work. And if you do it a week prior, cool. That gives everyone a lot more chance and time to review it. And that could be like reasonable middle ground.
the thing about it that's better is it's a bright line, right? Like to say you have to have this section filled out, we can't. It's just too hard to evaluate that, like because not every depends on the phase and depends on right, like so if we just say, hey, if your PR was opened like after this date, like it's automatically not gonna get in unless like you do an exception, or I mean, like if you're correcting spelling or something, it's one thing. But like if there's material changes, like yeah,
And
Ben,
it's easily
I feel like
verifiable.
this is not a lot more useful than the lead opted in label and won't change much. At most, it'll just teach people that they have to open a stub PR to not get caught by the cycle. I don't think it actually encourages people to do the real work earlier. I agree that this could be difficult to enforce, though. And also, I think that the approved by SIG is probably too high of a bar. I think if you have something where someone has made an earnest effort to have their PR ready for review, but they're still getting approval from a SIG, then those will just slip through to whatever the PRR approvers can pull off. I, I, I do think if we could come up with a tractable way to track it, that having the PR section at least attempted to fill out before a few days of the final deadline is a reasonable ask.
Yeah, but the quantifiability, like you can easily check if the PR was opened. At least that's
Sure,
something.
but
And
but
if you
but
put
does it
that much
help?
effort of creating the branch and opening a PR, maybe you'll just put that extra effort to fill in those 2 or 3 remaining questions that you have that are blocking you from going further. I
Well,
would start
what I'm
with
saying is
that
that
as a like
I actually
simple
frequently see that
compromise, and
they
then
did open the PR, but it's still not really reviewable. And the comment I leave is just, you didn't fill
I'm
this in.
yeah, I
So
know.
I don't think
Like
this moves the bar very much, but it does make more work that we have to do, which is to go check for those. So at that point, I would almost suggest not doing it because I think I don't want to introduce busy work. I think we want to make sure that if we do add anything, that it really helps. And even just checking for all the PRs being open is going to take some effort.
I mean, SIG release already verifies, and they will ping you in the enhancement whether you have a PR merged open and whatnot, because they are constantly verifying the progress of your work. up to the point where they are very deliberate about, oh, you don't have the PRR section filled in, or you're missing the PRR approver on your CAP update.
Yeah, they do that review. So what we would do is we'd say, hey, can you release team, can you go through it when you go through the enhancements and you're validating them, like basically start enforcing this deadline a week early that says, hey, instead of saying, hey, you've got this soft deadline coming, just say something like, look, if you don't have and we can even say, if you don't have an initial response, to all the PRR questions ready for review, in an open PR with that in there by this date, we're just automatically removing you out to the next release, right? Unless you create an exception, rather than what they do now, which is mark it at risk, right? No, it's not at risk. So it's basically moving part of the deadline a week earlier, and then there has to be an exception process. So like it is more work for SIG release, but it does kind of force people to not to have it approved, but to have it available for review by that time, which they do that like with docs too right now, right? Like they have other PRs they do that with. So what do you think of that, Ben? Like that sounds like a little more the bar you're asking for, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think we need to talk to SIG release.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know. I definitely just wanted to make sure that we discuss this. I feel like it's a problem. I'm not overly prescriptive with the exact solution. I mean, another way you could do this would be change no process at all, but agree as approvers that you're just not going to rush things at the end, so people will stop depending on that, and that will naturally push people to do things earlier. You could do that without introducing any process, but that might be a little bit harder to
Well, we already have the concept, and we've asked them to rename it of like, hey, you have to have this filled in by this date, not approved. Like when people see soft freeze, I think it has to be approved by that date. I get that question all the time. So we already have an issue out there asking SIG release to rename that, or the release team to rename that. Maybe we can ask them also to just enforce it. Like this is now you have to have this PR there. Like, I don't know. I guess
I shortly chatted with the SIG release
okay.
in London, and they were actually proposing this on their own when I was chatting with them. So I think that shouldn't be a big problem for them. I was talking about the soft freeze and how we are having issues with that, and they basically at that point already proposed me that they might be a little bit more deliberate about, I don't know, enforcing the soft freeze.
Okay. Well, let's then.
So I think it's about just making a concrete decision from our end over to them, and I believe that shouldn't be a big major ask for them to do it. And instead of at risk stating you're in, you're out, go fill the exception.
So can I propose then that Machi, unless there's objections here, that Machi, you go ahead and take that with SIG release and see if we can add that as part of the process, and we'll just see how it goes. If people get too upset, I don't think it's adding that. It's not actually adding anything that we didn't already have. It's just enforcing it.
Okay, I'll reach out to SIG release and start the discussion, and I'm like make sure that this is broadly announced in the release for 134.
Awesome. All right. Next topic then. It sounds like you guys, I didn't go back and see if anybody made a recording or no, there was no meeting. I actually haven't gone back and looked at the recording from SIGArch last time, but David, you're proposing this, and it sounds like we have a call for tomorrow. Did you want to talk more about it here, Matcha, or are you good with waiting till tomorrow?
I'll probably defer to David because I remember there was initial discussion in February. I fixed the date because it was all the way back. There was a follow-up to happen last time, but that was canceled, and I believe it's moved over to tomorrow. So I'm not sure how far the actual more stable betas proposal is
There is
at
an
this
open
point in time.
PR, so as far as I'm concerned, it's ready for review from John, Dims, and Derek to decide, are we going to do it, and are we going to enforce, and which release will we enforce in?
Okay. So what you're telling me is I got to go back and read this again, and be prepared to discuss it tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, in fairness, it has been up as a PR for weeks, at least 2.5 weeks. So,
Well, yeah, I understand. Yes. Okay, I can do that. Awesome. Do we have Rita here? I know you added this from Slack.
No, Rita mentioned that she won't be able to attend, but basically asked me, well, she basically asked in the Prod Readiness channel that do we have an airbag related question as part of the PRR
I
questionnaire?
don't think we do.
Yeah, I looked through the entire format. We have a couple of questions around monitoring about healthiness upgrades, but we don't have anyone specifically for the RBAC. And I believe adding something like that or modifying one of the existing question to also touch the RBAC would be a reasonable proposal. I'm not
So
sure.
the idea was, should this be added to the, like, whatever feature, whatever new RBAC there is for this feature, should it be added to the default roles or whatever, something like that?
Yes, something along. Are there any RBAC changes that were, I don't know, requested for this thing or something along those lines? I was looking at it earlier today. That's roughly what I was thinking. I can't remember which question I was
I mean, it
specifically
seems
looking at.
reasonable to me. Like, it's another thing that it's like a checklist item that I don't know if it's really production readiness, but it's kind of a checklist item for. I mean, it is in the sense of, like, if you roll this thing out and you've changed the RBAC rules, people probably need to know about that. So
I was thinking something, we have are there any tests for future enablement, disablement to maybe something along, are there or were there the necessary RBAC changes performed or will be there RBAC changes, something along those lines, I believe could help.
do you
Or
think
in
we
the
could-
rollout. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Do you
Sorry.
think we could instead have another section? So we already have several sections where we talk about, like, what do you do during skew, and how do you handle skew? Um, would it be more appropriate for a section there? Because I think when I think about production readiness, it's for alpha, we're talking about can we turn you on to try you? Can we turn you off if you fail? Can we turn you back on in a cluster after you've been turned off? How does that work? For beta, we have the questions about, okay, you're on by default. How do we know that you are functioning as we expect as a cluster admin? How does a user know that the feature is functioning properly when they're trying to use it? If and when it
how do we
fails,
monitor?
how do we debug it?
Yeah.
That's what those questions are failed on. And then for GA, we have the does it perform at scale? And scale is what I really remember about GA. But none of that is about, like, does it functionally work? And RBAC feels closer to does it functionally work?
Right. It's like a checklist item on the functional. That's kind of what I was kind of wary of putting
So
it
I'm
in.
in favor of having a section. I think production readiness really is focused on I turn this on. What is my risk profile when I turn it on? When it breaks, how do I turn it off? And then how can I monitor it once this thing is just going to be turned on in my cluster by default?
And how can I troubleshoot it? Yeah. Okay. I think I agree with you, David. Like, we could maybe just propose that they add a section in the CAP template, but not in production readiness area, which is equivalent, but So then we don't have to worry about it. What do you think, Macha?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. All right. So any other topics today?
I have a small tangent off of the feature beta things. I was debating if it makes more sense here as a comment, so I might just, if we have a moment, throw that out for you all to think about. So we've been doing some work to make it easier to actually test your alphas and betas, and to make sure that you can tag your tests with the feature gates metadata instead of like some pseudo feature. So if your test just depends on a feature gate, you're supposed to pass the feature gate now from like 134 forward. And it will automatically annotate the test with information like, is it an off by default feature and therefore it can't run in clusters that haven't opted to set this up? And is it an alpha? Is it a beta? And we can have some shared CI jobs for that. As part of that, I would like to figure out how we can have feature gate approvers request that the author of a feature gate promotion provide evidence that their tests are actually running and working, because the tests are also being promoted. So, aside from the inherent goodness of, yes, we have evidence that this feature works, when you promote a feature, any tests that are passing the feature gate are now sort of getting promoted in their own right. Uh, so like, I don't know if that's part of this beta feature gate KEP or just something that we talk about in Kubernetes, but somewhere in the process, providing some links that show, hey, here's like a test grid with like my test cases actually running for my feature. The feature name will also be exposed on the test when you're doing this. I think that's a healthier place to
do
be
have a
in.
section already in the KEP template. Not in production readiness, I think, but in the test area, right, where you're supposed to put in your coverage for the area.
Yeah. But right now you can just kind of say I have XYZ kind of tests. The thing that I think is different here is now when the PR that changes the feature gate, that has side effects on your test cases now if you've been passing them. If you're passing the feature gate to them. So it like if you had a test that was alpha and you promote your feature to beta and it was passing the feature gate, then it'll start running. And so for GA, it'll be really obvious because, or on by default, I should say, which might be beta. If your feature becomes on by default and you don't have any other restrictions placed on the test, it's going to run on that PR and fail. It's less clear for alphas and things, but I think especially for GA and beta, I think that feature approvers should be not having to dig through this themselves, but sort of expecting that the author prove this, because we've also seen in the past where people have like put in the KEP that they did this, and then it turns out their tests aren't actually running anywhere. They didn't check that. It's a lot easier to have them run now, so there's a lot less excuse to say, "Oh, oops, like I wrote this test, but we're not actually we're not actually testing it, and no one checked." But I want to put that work on the person promoting the feature. I just want to make sure that however we're doing the approvals for promotion of features, that evidence was provided. I don't think we're really doing that right now. You can just kind of say like, here's a link to some test code. But that doesn't tell me that you actually made sure it's running, which for E2E tests in particular, might be complicated. Like, as you well know, for DRA, the constraints on actually running it involve multiple feature gates and also underlying support in the cluster. And people working on that need to have made sure that it is getting tested.
Mm-hmm.
But also, when we promote the features now, not only is that really something you should have done before, but any of those tests that are passing that feature gate, the feature gate information just got promoted as well.
So the test the place you want to enforce this is on the PR that you're talking about when it shifts from off by default to on by default.
That's the big one, but I think really anytime you're doing it, like that should be an ask, like for whatever stage that the KEP is, like if you're taking your feature to beta, then, or you're taking your feature to alpha, then I think that's an ask that it's actually there. that might be the
Well,
cube
then
features
that's
PR, or it
so-
might be the enhancements PR. I'm not sure.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. Is there tooling we can do where if we see, right, that switch in the feature gate
Mhm.
default, that we can actually, like, we know the feature gate, we probably know how to craft a query against the test grid. Like, can we actually have a CI check?
There is not. And that's a very complicated problem. The other thing is it's not necessarily something that should be running in pre-submit. Like, for example, Node sometimes has features that require special functionality in container runtime that's not necessarily there yet. So they have some separate specialized job that they've set up for this. That's all fine. Also, I think it's a pretty easy ask for the feature developer. Like, you should know where the tests that you authored are running and be able to link to them. I could see it being something that we ask you to link to in the KEP template. I could see it something that we ask you to link to in the like cube features PR.
Right. That's what I was wondering about. But I guess the you're saying you could do it in the KEP template because that's when you're going to update your KEP template as you're moving stages, and so like we link other tests, we could link it there. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's a PRR question particularly. I mean, it is in a way because you're talking about feature gate enablement. So I don't know.
Well, it's one of the things
not
that David
opposed to
calls
that,
out
right?
in the
Acquiring some evidence that's not hard to get isn't something I'm opposed to, I guess. I'm just
one of
not.
the things that's called out in this beta feature promotion requirements changes that you should have all testing requirements for beta.
Right.
What I see right now is that
People just
sometimes
assume
we
it.
say we have them, but it's just some very vague notion of someone wrote some test code, which does not at all mean that they are actually testing it.
So you could add to the comment there. I thought we already had this somewhere, like link to test grid or something. Like you could.
But no one checks, and they're often not. And it was much harder. It was much more likely that if you had something that required a feature gate being turned on, that we weren't turning those on, and there wasn't a generic way to describe this, and so you might have been pretty high effort. But it's not now.
Yeah, we did those checks like during when people would promote their like the conformance tests, right? We would people would put the links to the test grid and the test, in the PR description. But I'm not opposed to that. Is anybody else opposed to beefing up the requirements there a little bit?
It sounds like maybe Cube feature PR is the right place to discuss this.
That would be fine too. Like I'm okay with either one. Personally.
Okay, that's the part that I need for you all to figure out, like where we need to go have that conversation and that check inserted. I think it should be a really lightweight thing for approvers. It's just like, if they didn't provide it, ask for it. If they provide it, like click and.
I'm not a cube feature approver, so hey, just go ahead. Sure, go ahead and do it there.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other comments from anybody else? No, they're all indifferent, Ben.
Okay, well, maybe that's for the Arch meeting or something. I'll think a little bit more about
Okay.
where to bring that. But if anyone has thoughts, please let me know. I'm trying to push on this thing where we, last year we had a feature that was promoted to beta, and they actually set it to be off by default because they knew that it wasn't reliable, and we went and stood up CI to run with all the betas turned on, and you couldn't even get the cluster online. Like, that's not okay to tell users this is beta. I can't even bring up a cluster with it turned on. I want to make sure that we close that gap. And so, it's kind of the difference between the saying that you'll do this kind of test in your KEP versus not only implementing them, but making sure they're running.
Sure. That's fair. No, I think that's reasonable. Okay, well, I think we've covered all the topics. So unless there's anything else, let's wrap it up, and I will see most of you probably tomorrow on the SIG Arch call. All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you tomorrow.
All right.
Thanks.